Jill will travel to Kenosha, Wisconsin today.
We've spoken to all the leaders up there, and although I have an outstanding call with the governor, we dealt with the staff, because and there's been overwhelming requests that I do come, because what we want to do is we got to heal, we got to put things together, bring people together. And so my purpose in going will be to do just that, to be a positive influence on what's going on, talk about what need be done, and try to see if there's a beginning of a mechanism to bring the folks together. We have to heal. This is about making sure that that we move forward.
And it will mark the Democratic presidential nominee's first visit to Wisconsin this year. The Democratic National Convention was supposed to be held in Milwaukee 2 weeks ago, but it was moved to a virtual format due to the pandemic. According to his campaign, Biden will hold a community meeting in Kenosha and make a local stop. Biden's visit comes just days after President Trump visited Kenosha to meet with law enforcement and survey some of the damage left from recent protests there. And sticking to the Democratic Party, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi may have violated San Francisco's new COVID-19 safety regulations that just went into effect Friday. Pelosi's chief of staff acknowledged that she got her hair done inside a San Francisco salon. That happened on Monday, but said through a statement that Pelosi and her staff were incorrectly told by someone at the salon that the business was allowed to have one customer at a time. Fox News reported the owner of the salon was angry that Pelosi had broken the rules. Pelosi's staff insisted Pelosi wore a mask except for a brief period, which you can see right there in the video. Pelosi spoke about the incident yesterday, calling it a setup. Take a listen.
I take responsibility for trusting the word of a neighborhood salon that I've been to over the years many times, and that when they said, well, we're able to accommodate people one person at a time, and that we can set up that time, I trusted that. As it turns out, it was a setup. So I take responsibility for falling for a setup. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
But during an appearance on Fox News, the salon owner denied that it was a setup and that the speaker arranged the appointment herself.
She had called the stylist or her assistant did and made the appointment. So
yes.
The appointment was already booked. So there's no way I could have set that up. And I've had a camera system in there for 5 years. I mean, I didn't go in there and turn cameras on as soon as she walked in to set her up.
A San Francisco cosmetologist who works at the salon that Pelosi visited attempted Wednesday to distance himself from the salon owner, and a statement issued by his lawyer, hairstylist Jonathan DiNardo, appeared to agree with Pelosi's accusation that her appointment at the salon on Monday was in fact a setup designed to embarrass the Democrat for allegedly ignoring coronavirus rules, according to reports. And speaking of hair products, Unilever says it's going greener. The consumer products company is pledging to stop using oil and gas to make its cleaning and laundry products by the year 2030. It says it's spending $1.2 billion to reach that green goal. It says by the end of the decade, household products such as OMO, Sunlight, Cif, and Domestos will be made using only renewable or recycled carbon. To get there, it plans to swap petrochemicals for materials sourced from plants and marine algae, and materials recovered from plastic waste and CO2 captured during production processes. Unilever says its products are used by 2.5 billion people each day in 190 countries. In a major cost savings mode, Ford plans to cut 1,400 white-collar jobs and is offering early retirement to help meet that goal. The auto giant sent letters to employees Wednesday saying early retirement offers will go into effect next week to eligible salaried staff. Employees who accept that offer by October 23rd will be scheduled to leave the company by the end of the year. If Ford doesn't hit its cost-cutting target with this involuntary incentive program, it says it may have to move forward with involuntary job cuts. Now, the move is part of a 5-year, $11 billion restructuring plan first announced 2 years ago. The news comes as the auto industry continues to struggle to cope with the economic downturn, of course, due to the COVID epidemic. Ford reported a 50% drop in revenue in the second quarter. The car maker has 30,000 salaried employees just here in the U.S. If you or someone you know is pregnant, you'll want to pay attention to this next story. A new COVID-19 study reveals possible risks to pregnant women. It was published in the BMJ Medical Journal. It says pregnant women diagnosed with COVID don't always show symptoms, but they are more likely to be admitted to the intensive care unit after a COVID-19 diagnosis. It also found pregnant women with COVID are at increased risk of developing preterm, but preterm birth rates were not high. The research added pregnant women are included in the list of people at moderate risk, so they should continue to follow the latest government guidance when it comes to the coronavirus. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is asking states to begin preparations to distribute a potential coronavirus vaccine as soon as late October. The CDC is offering plans on how to distribute a vaccine and who should get it first. Healthcare and essential workers, long-term care facility residents, and national security populations are at the top of that list. This does not mean the CDC thinks a vaccine will be approved in less than 2 months, however. The organization's director says that he thinks that will more likely happen by the end of the year. It's normal for the federal government to ready distribution networks, however, while scientists continue to work on vaccines. The government hopes to remove any stumbling blocks ahead of that time. One would be, of course, getting states to grant the permits and licenses that pharmaceutical company McKesson will need in order to distribute those vaccines. The federal government has a contract with McKesson to manage that distribution. Still ahead on this edition of News on the CDC, as we just mentioned, preparing states for a vaccine. But what does all of this mean to you? We're going to be joined by Dr. Nan Hayworth, Doug Badger, and Patrick Wood to discuss this and all things COVID-19 right after the break. And welcome back to News On. Before the break, we told you about the CDC's decision to have states prepare for the November 1st launch date of a COVID-19 vaccine. And with a reported 186,000 people who have died from that disease, it's a vaccine that, well, just couldn't happen soon enough. But like most subjects, the coronavirus has its share of skeptics, and a recent report from the CDC has called into question the need for such extreme measures. Here to discuss this and more, I'd like to welcome in our panel. Today, we're pleased to be joined by former Congresswoman and physician Dr. Nan Hayworth, visiting fellow for domestic policy studies at the Heritage Foundation, Doug Badger, and Patrick Wood, the executive director and founder of Citizens for Free Speech. Thank you all for joining us here on News On. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Miranda.
So Patrick, I want to start with you. You recently wrote an article that highlights the CDC study that showed nearly 94% of COVID-19 reported deaths had an underlying condition. Can you explain this a little bit?
Well, it's not too hard to understand. The critics of anybody who points this out are really kind of hopping up and down right now. But the idea is that the coronavirus that we're facing today has not been as deadly as was promoted to us from the beginning, way back when the first study came out from England about how dangerous and how widespread this virus would be. And the science is now starting to simply just fall apart on face mask wearing, on social distancing, on the deadly nature of the virus. And this article, or this statement that the CDC put out, just pointed out that a relatively small percentage of people have died exclusively from the coronavirus. And the other 94% had, on average, 2.6 comorbidities. Other things like diabetes, could be heart trouble, could be emphysema, and so on. So, this is not as nearly as deadly as they originally thought. And then all of the scientific things surrounding the response to this now are also starting to fall apart. So the pseudoscience behind this whole great panic of 2020 is just starting to unwind, in my opinion.
So, hearing what you're saying, Patrick, then some people playing devil's advocate may sit there and argue, okay, then why is the U.S. not alone? All these other countries have been taking certain safety precautions, shutting down cities left and right because of COVID-19 if it's not so dangerous. And why is the Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden himself, recommending that if he were elected president, there would be a mandate for all people to wear a mask?
He would like to do that for sure. And from our point of view at Citizens for Free Speech, we defend and support the First Amendment. Wearing a face mask and social distancing and also closing churches like in California right now are just egregious violations of the First Amendment. However this is handled in society is up to society, but as it stands now, the First Amendment is under a full court attack, and we simply cannot allow this to stand. We must restore the First Amendment to its appropriate position in, the functioning of our society, because if we are not allowed to communicate, everything else will just simply come to a stop, as it has actually.
Dr. Hayworth, as a doctor, I'd like you to weigh in.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not so much, respectfully to Patrick, with whom I agree on many points, it's not really so much that pseudoscience, Miranda, it's that we have a rapidly evolving scientific challenge. We have a virus that itself is changing and mutating. Thank goodness it seems to have mutated into a less deadly strain, which is wonderful. But this has been an effort that has been surrounded, I would agree with Patrick very much, by politics. And I think a lot of political alliances have distorted the way in which we view data and evidence, particularly, conspicuously, surrounding the freedom of prescribers to administer hydroxychloroquine to their patients with COVID as outpatients. I think we've got a lot of good news that we're seeing, not only in terms of the virus having changed it in its virulence, probably, but also, yes, in the impending arrival, we hope, of a vaccine in an unprecedented effort. Thank you so much to President Trump. They've got all the manufacturing capabilities, all the logistics lined up for administration of the vaccine, especially to those most at risk as soon as it arrives and is deemed safe. That is to say, of course, by the FDA. And we do need to open up the country again. I agree completely with Patrick, because there are consequences of lockdowns that are profound, and they are not only medical, because there have been undiagnosed and untreated and ignored illnesses, including cancers, that will be taking their toll and already are. We have had excess deaths among young people, deaths of despair, economic hardships that have all of the implications for public health and individual health. So it is absolutely time to open up the country. And a national mask mandate would be a terrible thing. How is the federal government going to enforce that? And in fact, Kamala Harris says she doesn't intend to. So great. The tool of tyrants, selective enforcement of the law. Enforce it on people you want to oppress. Let everybody else go. It's a terrible idea.
But Dr. Hayworth, again, going to the point, and some people have made this argument, again, just playing devil's advocate here, the United States is not alone when it comes to shutting down, cities. I mean, we had it happen in Italy. We've had it happen in China. We've had it happen all over the world. I mean, are you suggesting that maybe the president made a mistake when he was shutting down travel?
No.
Is this?
No, not at all.
So you think he made the right decision?
I think the president made the right decision, especially the right decision given the evidence he had at that time. But in the fullness of time, what we've discovered, and as we look at the data, it's not clear that lockdowns have a net beneficial effect, and may not, in fact, actually, except perhaps in very concentrated populations, maybe like in New York City, but may not have any utility at all. So it's with what we know now, I have nothing but praise for President Trump and everything he's done. Again, we're dealing with a very rapidly evolving situation. But with what we know now, lockdowns should end. Joe Biden's threatened national shutdown, should certain conditions prevail, is absolutely the wrong idea, not only scientifically, but also from the standpoint of every other aspect of this crisis that we have to consider.
Doug, I want to get you to weigh in on this conversation. Obviously, we're hearing support for the president here, but as you know, those on the left are blaming the president when it comes to COVID-19 deaths. They're also blaming him for the shutdown of businesses. Is the president responsible at all for any of that, or was he ill-advised when he made the decisions that he made at the time? Because what I hear from a lot of Americans is they're kind of confused. If it's not that deadly, then why do we have this huge shutdown?
Yeah, and I think the president has been ill-served by some of the senior members of the public health establishment. The purpose of the lockdowns was to prevent hospitals from being overrun with an influx of patients. Lockdowns don't reverse the pandemic. They slow the progression. They used to tell us back in the spring they wanted to flatten the curve. Well, flattening the curve doesn't reduce the area under the curve. It just changes its shape. So lockdowns have never been the solution. And I think, again, on an episodic basis in a city that's facing a large number of cases where hospital capacity is threatened, a lockdown might make some sense for a period of time. But what we've seen in the U.S. is that our hospital capacity, our ICU capacity, our ability to care for ventilator-dependent patients is really rather robust and resilient. And we haven't seen some of the things that we saw in Italy and Milan and Bergamo and elsewhere where they were unable to care for some of the sickest patients.
As I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, CDC saying it's very close to having a vaccine. The president has mentioned that it will happen before the end of the year. CDC is saying could happen as early as November. States should prepare right now. But we already have seen some protests happening around the country with certain citizens saying it better not be mandated. There's concern there. Patrick, I want to go to you first. Your thoughts on that. Should it be mandated?
I say absolutely not. And it's not the role of government to dictate to citizens their things that really should be their free choice. If somebody wants to do a certain thing with their health, it's their business. But the government just does not have a role. And I think that people should be responsible for their own health. That's, kind of goes along with the health freedom movement, I guess. It's, my own body. I should be able to make my own choices. A lot of people don't want to take vaccines. Some do. And I say that's fine. Let them go. If they want to do that, they have the right to do that. But for all the people that don't, just because they disagree on a political issue, which has become politicized, the government has no right, and nor does anybody else in society have the right to enforce their will on somebody who says, look, I just don't want to take the vaccine. It's my business. I don't have to explain to you. I just don't want to take it. Mm-hmm. Those people are really getting hammered and persecuted right now around the world.
Dr. Hayworth, 20 seconds to you to respond. Should it be mandated or not? And then I want to give the last word to Doug before we go to break.
Yeah, it shouldn't be federally mandated, Miranda. I think states have the power within their public health authorities to institute certain requirements. So I think we may see things on a state-by-state basis. I'd like to see it voluntarily accepted as broadly as possible.
Last word to you, Doug.
I agree with Dr. Hayworth. The federal government has no authority, none, under the Constitution to mandate vaccine. And anyone who suggests that they do, I think, is mistaken.
Thank you all for joining us here on News On. Pleasure to have you. Hope to have you back.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful holiday weekend as well. Still ahead here on News On. It's Thursday, and that means it's time to talk about your money with tax expert Julio Gonzalez. He joins us live to answer your questions, including one about retirement and how the president's payroll tax actions may impact it. Stick around. Welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. It's time to talk about your money. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we break it down, talk about the economy with the founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services, Julio Gonzalez. We're also highly encouraging you, to submit your questions either via our community platform at americasvoice.news, or you can go on to any of our social media pages, including his very own. Again, that's Engineered Tax Services. It's just one more way that we're aiming to give you, America, a voice. So good to see you, my friend.
So good to see you. We love the questions.
I do love the questions. So let's start here. If we can go ahead and take a look. So we had a Social Security question that was asked. But before we go to it, on August 8th, this is what it's in reference to. President Trump signed an executive order to defer payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare. That much. Well, that's been well reported. And while that could give quite a few working Americans a slightly larger paycheck, it might also have a big impact on retirement. And that has people worried, and some of them a little confused, including Dallas Peterson from Lenexa, Kansas, who wrote in to ask this question. Did Trump cut the tax that supports Social Security disability and Social Security in general? Did you know, if this is true, something about payroll tax? So he was looking at various reports, confused about it all. A lot of people are kind of confused about this executive order, but going to the question, for people who are on disability, Social Security, retirement, how much could this impact that?
And that's a really good question. And I think that this is a deferral. So the payroll taxes that the executive order is about is not paying them through the end of the year, but paying them back starting in January. So I think, it wouldn't impact it, right? Because we're just paying it back. We're just deferring it.
Right.
What could be impactful is
if you can't pay it back.
Right, if you can't pay it back, right?
There's that problem. So you have to make sure that you actually manage it. But it could be helpful for some people right now that just need the cash now. It's almost like, but you're not getting off easy.
Yeah, I think what the president is trying to do is stimulate the economy, hope that these vaccines kick in, and that the economy will rebound strongly and people be able to obviously pay this back this holiday.
Bottom line, disability, Social Security, it's just confusion. Don't worry about it. You're going to be okay.
Well, I mean, maybe some confusion, but yeah, I think hopefully this is the best way to stimulate the economy and ultimately get more money into those funds.
All right, well, we'll see. We're also starting to hear that despite the IRS distribution guidelines as to how employers should handle this tax break, that many companies just won't be participating, citing that a legal hornet's nest they could face by abiding to the order. Why is this the case? And if enough companies don't abide by the order, is it very effective? So we've talked about this before, having you on the program. Some companies saying, the president hasn't clearly laid out the guidelines. It just went into effect this month. Why is there so much apprehension for this?
Well, I think finally the IRS came out with the guidelines this week. So now there's
But I know last time we had you on, you were like, what guidelines? You don't need guidelines. Of course, you're an expert. You've been doing this for a long time. But regardless, do they help?
Well, they help in the sense that people know when do you have to pay it back. But obviously, it's just a deferral, and that we're paying it back when the guidelines came out. And, the IRS said clearly, when do you pay it back? And so, now we have that guidance. And certainly the businesses are afraid because what if they can't pay it back, right?
So that's probably the biggest concern is like, yes, it's going to be helpful now, but what happens if I can't pay it back later, if things don't reopen and things continue to improve?
Right. It's great to take the discount now, but can I pay that back? And if I don't, do I have penalties? Do I have liabilities associated with not doing so?
Yeah, legitimate concern. So meanwhile, you have Democrats in Congress doing everything they can to overturn these orders from the president. So they were unleashing their discontent with this measure, in fact, yesterday. How successful will they actually be, do you think, as far as overturning this executive order from the president?
Well, I don't think they'll be successful at all. I mean, the IRS has given the guidance, and
so
people and payroll companies are moving forward with it. So
do you think it's more just like lip service to, their supporters, knowing very well that there's not much they can do?
I think it's definitely that.
Definitely that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears here for just a second. So there was a report that came out from the Wall Street Journal, saying that retail evictions are up, with nearly 30% of retail businesses just unable to pay the rent. So, what happens to these small businesses? And is this, I realize that COVID obviously is playing a part of that, but there are some people that would argue that this is just kind of the direction that retail is headed anyway because of the success of companies like Amazon. What's your take on that? And does PPP play a role in any of this?
Well, I think it all plays a role. So I think that the executive order basically is deferring any eviction for any property that has a government loan. And, is that lawful? Is it helpful to businesses that aren't getting rent from these people? I think we're all in a compromised position. We all have to figure out the best ways to get through this.
Move forward, right?
And I think going forward, we're now going to see leases that explain to both the owner and the tenant what happens if we have a pandemic, because that's something we've never really had in our leases. And I think going forward, that'll be addressed, and we'll have a new normal in terms of how we do leases, right?
Yeah, that's probably true. But, we've seen some of these businesses, like Pier 1, for example, they've been around for a long time. Is this necessarily due to COVID? Or, again, do you think this is a trend that more and more people are going online? And do you think that will lead to those companies, maybe some competition, I guess, if you will, when it comes to Amazon? I know Walmart's talked about that, but do you think that will lead to that?
I think so. I think the stock market clearly thinks that's the trend we're going, right? They're putting all the money in the market into these tech companies.
So also want to talk about the CDC here. So the CDC doing something a little different. So the president just ordered the CDC to ban landlords from evicting tenants that can no longer afford to pay rent. Of course, again, due to COVID-19. That order, along with previously issued federal protections, could ensure all of the nation's 40 million rental households will be able to keep the residents due to the pandemic. But that order is also, again, testing the limits of the CDC's power. So what can you tell about this? And is it a good idea for the federal government to kind of intervene in this way?
I think it's tough. I mean, to think that you're not getting rent as a landlord and you're going to have your property taken from you because you can't replace that rent with someone that can pay. And that's a difficult, slippery slope, right?
It's a sticky situation, right? Because you, of course, feel for these people who have nowhere else to go. You don't want them homeless through no fault of their own, not able to work because of COVID-19. At the same time, if you're a landlord, and that's also how you make your money is by renting those properties, that's a tough situation for you too. But overall, wouldn't that kind of protect everyone?
Well, I think that if the government wants to do anything in these regards, maybe they subsidize the housing and keep the economy going, because without it, and we can't pay the banks back, and we have a bank collapse, that would be horrible coming through this pandemic. So I think there's a better solution.
Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about today is the corona release talks and what's stalling them. We've been talking about this, it seems like, for weeks on end. So it has to do with money, or should I say lack thereof. According to a report from the Congressional Budget Office, the deficit for this fiscal year is projected to be a record-breaking $3.3 trillion. So we've heard from Mnuchin the other day saying, he's meeting with Democrats, that hopefully they can meet in the middle. But then this report comes out, and you have your fiscal hawks, like, for example, like a Ted Cruz, are saying there's no way we're going to come up from there. Because here you have, Democrats in the House saying we want over 3, and then we've had the Republicans saying, yeah, we're not going to go over 1. Do you think we're actually going to meet in the middle with that $2 trillion mark and have a COVID relief bill by as early as next week?
I think there's good indication. Certainly the president said
and I hate to do that to you because I know we talked about this before.
I know, right? I was wrong before. Listen, but I think the president indicated this week that there will be some compromise. Mm-hmm. And again, when you think about debt, if you're in business, sometimes you take on debt to grow, right? Sometimes you borrow to grow. And if you don't borrow, maybe you can't grow. And if we can't grow, maybe we can't get this economy going back again. Maybe we can't pay back the debt. So sometimes we have to invest in ourselves. And I think it's a, opposition. Do we invest in ourselves or don't we?
So do you think, in your opinion, I know you're a supporter of the president, Do you think that Democrats and Republicans should try to reach that $2 trillion mark?
Yeah, I think we have to compromise, right? So that ultimately...
What? Did you say compromise? I didn't know that it was capable of doing that anymore.
Well, we did it with the CARES Act, right?
Yeah, we did it, and that came around very quickly.
Right.
This one, not so much.
Not so much, but if we get that compromise, maybe we give some people a little more cushion or funding to get through this pandemic, get the vaccine in place, and then come out of it on the other side ready to rebound more efficiently.
Well, of course, we'll continue to keep a close watch on that. And again, just want to remind all of you watching that if you have a question for Julio Gonzalez, he's been doing this for 20 plus years, not to age you at all, but kind of an expert.
I feel old now.
No, but young. You're young at heart.
Yeah.
But very experienced with that. You deal with companies all around the country and the world talking about ways that they can save money. So if you have a question, maybe it's about coming up with a COVID relief bill, any concerns that you may have, again, you can join our community platform by going to americasvoice.news. You can submit your question there. You can also find us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Parlay, we're on CloudHub. You can also go to his page directly, which is Engineered Tax Services. Julio Gonzalez, always a pleasure to have you.
Great seeing you.
Great seeing you. Keep it right here on News On. There is still more to come. Most importantly, we're going to hear more from you, America. It's the most important segment that we do here on this program, and that is letting your voice be heard. That's coming up. We'll be right back. Welcome back to News On. I'm Miranda Khan. Many of you probably have some plans taking place this Labor Day weekend, so we want to get a quick check of your weather with Weather Nation's Rob Bradley.
Well, good Thursday to you. I'm meteorologist Rob Bradley with an update from Weather Nation. We are continuing to track the tropics in a very active 2020 season across the Atlantic Basin. National Hurricane Center monitoring 2 current systems as well as 3 areas that have the potential to develop into tropical systems over the next 5 days. Nana working its way into Belize this morning as a Category 1 hurricane. Omar moving out to the east just to the north of Bermuda, expected to bring some choppy seas into the area as it gradually dissipates over the next several afternoons. There are 3 waves off the west coast of Africa, however. The National Hurricane Center is monitoring for development over the next several days. The area right to the south of the Cabo Verde Islands given a low chance to develop by the National Hurricane Center. The other 2 areas, the red area and the yellow area that are overlapping, those are expected to combine into one bigger tropical wave over the next several days. And that's what the National Hurricane Center is giving a high chance to develop into our next tropical depression. After Laura and Nana and Omar, our next named system would be Paulette. Nana tracking inland across northern Guatemala after making landfall as a Category 1 hurricane this morning around 1 a.m. Central Time. Maximum sustained winds of around 75 miles per hour. Happened just about 50 miles to the south of Belize City, and the winds since have weakened to a tropical storm, but it is still expected to bring some very heavy rain across portions of Guatemala, southern Mexico, San Salvador, and Honduras as we head through your Thursday and Friday before it becomes a remnant low after moving through the mountains of Guatemala and Mexico. But this system could redevelop after it heads out into the eastern Pacific as we head through the end of this week and early into next weekend. So there's that yellow shaded area where the remnants of Nana are expected to move, and that's what we could potentially see redevelop again out in the eastern Pacific. And if it does redevelop, it would get a new name, potentially becoming Julio if another system doesn't develop first in the eastern Pacific. We're still tracking Omar as well. It's off to the north of Bermuda, still weakening, wind sustained at 35 miles an hour, moving east very quickly at 14, expected to continue as a tropical depression through the evening hours tonight before becoming a remnant low and eventually dissipating in the open Atlantic waters. We do want to get you to some of your top weather headlines, though. Kara, we are watching a chance for severe weather today across portions of the mid-Atlantic region, focused right around that Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area.
Yep, we have a lot to talk about with that because we have the jet stream starting to move the energy, the upper level energy further to the northeast, and that will give us that favorable wind energy to get storms going and to make them stronger, and in some cases even severe storms. That's in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and then further to the surface, this cold front moving in, combining with all of that Gulf of Mexico moisture, heat and humidity, leads to good energy at the surface here, especially from the Delmarva area north. That's going to give us better energy and the chance for some strong storms there as well. And we do mostly have the risk today with these storms that move through into the peak heating hours of gusty straight line winds in excess of 60 to 70 miles an hour. This is primarily going to be towards Baltimore and Washington and almost down towards Charlottesville, but anywhere in the surrounding yellow areas from Philadelphia down to nearly Richmond is kind of in the bullseye there for those gusty straight line winds. And the tornado potential is also elevated as well. It's mostly going to be for the same areas, Baltimore and Washington, D.C. This is where our best chances of seeing an isolated tornado. But in surrounding areas, anywhere from Charlottesville to Parsons, all the way out to Philadelphia, nearly to New York City, is kind of in the enhanced area for tornado potential for today. And this is mostly going to be during our peak heating hours. This is going to be during the afternoon and early evening, right in time for some of us to be coming home from work, maybe doing some of our evening activities. Definitely want to keep an eye on the radar. Through 3 p.m., we'll see these storms start to fire and then very quickly move to the east, seeing our bullseye area for thunderstorm potential towards Baltimore and Washington, D.C. right around 5 p.m., just in time for that commute home. For more headlines, head over to our website.
Thanks so much. So what do you think? That's what we want to know. You have a voice, and guess what? We want to hear it. It's why we're called America's Voice. Stick around. Your voice coming up next, right here on News On. And welcome back to News On. Here at America's Voice News, our goal is to give you a voice. Simply join our community platform, which you can find on our website at americasvoice.news, or you can reach out to us on social media, submit your comment or question, and we may air it on this very program. Last night we asked you if you thought that there would be a debate and if it will be live between President Trump and his opponent, Joe Biden, and how it would fare. So our first comment comes from Jeffy Durr. He says that he thinks it will happen and that he's very much looking forward to it. He is supporting Trump and that the debate will not change his vote. Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing your opinion with us. Meanwhile, Michael Gursario, I hope I'm saying this right, Gursario shared this response. He said that he'll be watching just to see Sleepy Joe fumble. Sleepy Joe, of course, is a nickname that the president has used while campaigning to describe his opponent. Michael, thank you so much for sharing. The next comment comes from Marilyn Carlisle. She says that she would welcome a live debate, but she wants to see real topics and real plans, no candy coating BS. Marilyn, I think it's fair to say a lot of people would agree with you. And our final comment today comes from Don Braca. He wrote in to tell us that he believes that they'll say Biden won in an apparent reference to the mainstream media. He finished by saying that's the liberal lack of reality. Don, keep your eyes locked here to News On. We promise to work very hard to give you honest, unbiased coverage of any and all debates. And we can tell you, as it stands now, that there are 3 debates scheduled for Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. The first one is scheduled for the 29th of this month. That's going to take place in Cleveland, Ohio. It's being reported that Fox News Channel's Chris Wallace will moderate that debate. The second one is scheduled to take place in Miami, October 15th. And that will be moderated by C-SPAN's Steve Scully. And a third and final presidential debate will take place October 22nd. That's taking place in Nashville, and it will be moderated by Kristen Welker of NBC. No word yet on how these debates will be conducted due to COVID. We'll, of course, keep you posted. I know a lot of people would like to see them happen live. And be sure and keep an eye on America's Voice News, our social pages. And again, share your thoughts with us. You can even send us a video. We'd love to hear from you. So, man's best friend is getting his own beer. It's called Dog Brew by Bush. The non-alcoholic bone broth is made from bone-in pork butt, celery, mint, turmeric, and ginger. You can pour the whole can into the water bowl, or you can use it to soften Fido's food. It's not the first time, though, that a brewery has included dog beer on its list, but it may be the most expensive. Check this out. A 4-pack sells online for $10. It's currently sold out. Can you believe it? But you can sign up for a waiting list. Bush said it will donate $1 for every 4-pack to the Best Friends Animal Society. Well, that's good. At least your money's going to a good cause. And from dogs and beer to big cats, Dancing with the Stars just announced next season's lineup. And I think you're going to like it, or at least find it interesting. Remember her? Carol Baskin, made famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it. The Netflix docuseries, you probably remember seeing her in. Tiger King will be competing in the new season of Dancing with the Stars. The animal activist was one of the many season 29 stars revealed Tuesday on Good Morning America. Grammy Award-winning rapper Nelly will be another one of the celebrity contestants, and Backstreet Boys singer AJ McLean will also be dancing. Other celebrities competing include TV host Nev Schulman, well known for the documentary film Catfish, an Olympic figure skater and on-air commentator Johnny Weir. Additionally, the COVID-19 safe version of the show will also have a new host for the first time. Tyra Banks will take over after the sudden departure of Tom Bergeron, who hosted for 15 years. And moving on from one television show to the next, first Netflix had The Crown. Now its staff includes some real royals, of course. The streaming company announced that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have signed a multi-year production deal. It does not mean Meghan Markle is returning to acting, though she and Prince Harry may appear on camera for some projects. The royal couple will be producing exclusive Netflix content like scripted series, documentaries, features, and children's shows. For Netflix, the deal is similar to the one the company did with the former President Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. That took place back in 2018. Financial terms of the deal with the Duke and the Duchess have not yet been announced. And if you're over streaming movies on your sofa, well, we've got some good news for you, aren't we all? AMC, the world's largest movie theater chain, says it will reopen. Get ready for this. 140 more movie theaters by Friday. That means that 70% of the company's theaters, or 420 total, will be open by this holiday weekend as Americans observe Labor Day. The news comes just ahead of the U.S.'s releases of The Tenant, one of the first big movies to hit theaters since the pandemic struck. The film's international debut was last weekend. Other major theater chains have been opening up as well, while facing the challenge of attracting audiences without any major releases. AMC first reopened more than 100 theaters in the U.S. on August 20th. And Lego, you can add that to the list of companies that is benefiting from people spending more time at home. The Danish toy maker said Wednesday that sales jumped 14% in the first half of 2020 as compared to the same time last year. The CEO pointed to investments in e-commerce as crucial during a period in which retail stores were shut. And it's not just Lego. Video game companies have also seen a surge in sales since social distancing restrictions have been encouraging people to find new ways to pass the time. Nintendo's operating profit more than quadrupled in its most recent quarter. That's a lot. Some good news. I'd like to see some good news for some companies. And again, I want to remind all of you to stay tuned tonight at 6:30 Eastern Time. Again, the president is going to be going to Pennsylvania, where he's going to be holding a rally there. We're going to have live team coverage. Tudor Dixon with America's Voice Live is going to be heading that coverage. We're also going to have David Zier from Breaking Point joining as well, and Heather Mullins. You don't want to miss it. The president is expected to speak at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, but you can keep it right here at 6:30 Eastern Time. And I will see you here again tomorrow on America's Voice News for News On, beginning at noon. See you then. Enjoy the rest of your day.